I've been doing more and more upholstery projects recently, but this one is going to be the toughest one yet. But luckily, I've got all the tools for the job, so I'm excited to tackle it. Let's get started. I'll be replacing the old foam with CushionRite Premium Foam and the old vinyl with this red Covington upholstery fabric. But no matter how good the new upholstery looks, it's not going to make these legs look any better. A few could be sanded and stained, but the last owner's dog really liked this leg, so I have to come up with another way to hide it. And it wouldn't be one of my projects if I didn't find a way to add some leather. So I wrap these legs in leather. If you ever need to make a template for an irregular shape like this, try this masking tape trick. I wrapped the area I wanted covered in tape, keeping it as snug as I could. It helps to overlap each layer slightly so it peels off as one piece later on. When everything's covered, I cut a line right down the middle, peeled the tape off, and that left me with my shape. You can check out the full video linked below for more details on how to get the perfect fit with this technique. Then I used that template to cut out my leather, then punch the stitching holes, and start sewing around each leg. I used a baseball stitch, but you could also do a cross or parallel stitch. I've been using this stitch a lot recently, so let me know in the comments if you would want a full tutorial on it. The legs turned out great. Not only did they cover the damage, but I think they looked better than before, or at least more unique. And with the legs done, I can move on to the upholstery. I removed all the hardware and started pulling out staples. This normally would be the most tedious part of the project, unless you've got the right tools. My go-to teardown tools are the staple lifter and staple remover. The lifter glides under and pops out the staples, and if there's a stubborn one, I use the remover. Its rounded jaws roll back to leverage the staple out without damaging the surrounding materials. Smaller staples like these typically pop right out with the lifter, but for heavy duty staples like we're going to use later, the remover is a huge help. We got hay in here. Oh man. I'm kind of scared of that. My original plan was to remove the foam, which I now realize is straw, and then seam rip the old upholstery and use that kind of as a template for the new upholstery. But this thing is gross and I want it out of the studio, so we're just going to chunk all of this. We will keep this and use that as a template to cut our foam, but I think we're just going to do the upholstery from scratch. Maybe we'll use the Sailrite Fabric Calculator as well, because this thing's got to go. With everything disassembled and cleaned up, I could start cutting the new foam and fabric. Since I couldn't reuse the old vinyl for measurements, I used the Sailrite Fabric Calculator. I selected platform cushions and entered my base size, which is a 15¼ inch square, and added 1 inch to that for a finished size of 16¼ by 16¼ inches. For the thickness, I added up the foam, which is 2 inches, the batting, which is ½ inch, and the base, which is another ½ inch, for a total of 3 inches. The calculator told me I'd need just over ½ yard of fabric and gave me all the cut sizes. My top plate should be a 16¾ inch square, and my foam is the same. But since I'm adding some ½ inch batting, I actually cut the foam to 16¼ inches instead, so it'd be 16¾ once the batting is added. I'm doing the boxing a little differently than what is typical. I'm using 2 panels instead of 4, but I could still use the calculator's numbers. It showed I need a total of 67 inches of length and 6 inches for the width. So I split the 67 inches in half and added some extra room for seam allowance, which left me with 2 34 by 6 inch panels. This is a bit longer than I need, but I'll show you how I trimmed it down to size later. Patterning is always the hardest part of any DIY project, and the fabric calculator makes it so much easier. So play around with that sometime if you haven't tried it out before. If you're doing any kind of upholstery, this acrylic ruler is a must-have for quickly and accurately marking panels. The way I use it is I mark the length I need, then just use the end as a square to get my next line started. Then I just slide the ruler over to complete that line and continue. I use my 10-inch Kai professional scissors, which cut beautifully all the way to the tip of the blades, which will come in handy later. I cut the boxing panels on the fold, and when I cut strips, I use the acrylic ruler again with a rotary cutter, and I don't bother marking anything with chalk since I can measure and cut the whole piece in one step this way. The first thing I sewed were the two boxing panels together with a 1/2 inch seam allowance, and I basted that seam flat. Instead of the usual corner seams, there are two seams along the boxing, which will fall in the middle of the top plate on two sides. I marked those two center points on the top plate and aligned the boxing seam with one of them and clipped the fabric until I got about 2 inches from the opposite center line. This is where I started sewing. I stitched with a 1/2 inch seam allowance, like the fabricator recommended, and made some relief cuts in the corners with the tip of my scissors, and used the fabric edge match pliers to shape the fabric since my fingers sometimes get in the way. This tool has another important function I'll show later. I stopped sewing 2 inches short of the center line, which left a 4-inch gap. To match the opposite boxing seam, I marked where the layers should meet with a small scissor cut right over the center mark. Then I added 1/2 inch to each side for seam allowance, trimmed the excess, then sewed and basted it flat to make the second boxing seam. Doing it this way, that seam lined up perfectly on that center line, so I was ready to sew that 4-inch gap closed. I turned the cover right side out and top stitched an 1/8 inch from the seam, keeping the seam allowance pressed towards the boxing. The old upholstery had piping, but I skipped that because I don't want to feel the cord on the back of my legs. That finished up the sewing so I could move on to the foam. I used 2-inch CushionRite Premium Foam with medium firmness. I used the acrylic ruler again to mark the size, and I cut out the shape with a Sailrite blade corded foam saw. We also have a cordless version, but I reached for this one since it has a rolling bottom plate to help me cut a perfect 90-degree angle, which is what I want for this cushion. It cuts through foam easily and gives you great control, like you see here with the rounded corners. I covered the foam with batting and adhered it to the foam with CushionRite spray adhesive. I also cut a 4-inch wide strip of batting for the sides, which will hang over that wood base so the whole cushion looks plush. For the final assembly, I used one of my favorite upholstery tools, the Sailrite long nose upholstery staple gun. Any pneumatic staple gun will speed things up, but this one is designed specifically for upholstery. It's made to drive the staples just deep enough without letting the crown, which is the top of the staple, pierce the fabric. I stapled the flat sides first, trimmed away a little bit of batting in the corners to make room for the hardware, and then finished up with the corners last. The fabric edge match pliers really helped to tension the fabric as I made my way around. Finally, I lined up the black dots I marked earlier and started reinstalling everything. I decided to keep the leather stitching on the legs facing out since it took a while to hand sew these, so might as well show them off. This project went even smoother than my last few upholstery builds. More experience helps, but really the right tools are what make all the difference. If you're getting into upholstery or looking to upgrade your setup, you can find all the tools and materials I used today at Sailrite.com. I'll leave a full list down in the description, or you could scan any of those QR codes that have been popping up throughout the video. Thanks for watching. I hope you found this helpful or at least entertaining, and I'll see you in the next one.